I didn't blink. I just stared at the grain in the conference table, the same table I'd refinished with my own hands when the company was still a promise and not a carcass. "So you sold my patents?" I asked. Mom laughed, a short, bright sound. "We sold our company." The lawyer stood up. "Actually," he rose like a curtain lifting. That was when I knew they'd already miscalculated. I learned early that betrayal doesn't arrive screaming. It smiles. It wears familiar voices. It calls itself family. We built this thing together once. Dad taught me how to read balance sheets before bedtime stories. Mom proofed my first patent draft, red pen tapping the margins like a metronome. We shared dinners under fluorescent lights, arguing about tolerances and margins, celebrating small wins with cheap wine. When the first license check cleared, Dad hugged me so hard my ribs complained. Then Brent arrived. He was efficient, polished. He called my parents sir and ma'am and called me by my first name, like we were equals. He took credit with a shrug and borrowed authority like it was a jacket he'd always owned. He spoke in forecasts and exits. He made them feel safe. I felt the draft when the door opened. The signs were subtle. Calendar invites I wasn't copied on, contracts redlined without my initials, my name drifting from lead inventor to consultant in internal decks. I asked questions. I was told to trust. Family, after all. The night I found out wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Too quiet. I was updating a firmware roadmap when an automated alert pinged my phone. A filing, a transfer, a holding entity I didn't recognize, Briar Hollow Trust, now listed as the assignee on my core patents. My patents, the ones I'd filed at 2 a.m., coffee cooling beside me, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I read it twice, then a third time. Pain is fast. Clarity is faster. I didn't confront them. I planned. I pulled every version of every agreement I'd ever signed. I mapped the cap table the way I map a circuit. Nodes, flows, dependencies. I called a friend who never asks why. I paid in cash. I set up surveillance that wasn't cameras. Emails archived. Call logs preserved. Calendar metadata frozen in amber. I watched the timing. I watched the tells. They thought I was shrinking. I was rearranging. The trust was my last gift to myself years ago, after my first burn. A retirement vehicle on paper, a fortress in practice. It held my voting rights, my reversions, my triggers. I'd built it like a trap that only closed when you stepped exactly where you weren't supposed to. They stepped. The sale closed on a Friday. Champagne popped in the kitchen I used to sleep in during crunch weeks. Brent shook hands. My parents signed with practiced smiles. They fired me in the same breath, like it was housekeeping. "Understood," I said, quietly. That was the moment the trust activated its voting rights. By Monday morning, the board convened an emergency meeting. The subject line was frantic. The room smelled like burned coffee and panic. I joined remotely. I didn't turn my camera on. "Who just fired the person who owns 76% of the shares?" the interim chair asked, voice thin. Silence can be a weapon. I let it cut. Dad finally spoke. "That's not possible." The lawyer, my lawyer, cleared his throat. "Actually," he laid it out without drama. The patents had clawbacks. The sale violated covenants. The trust's trigger had been pulled the moment they transferred assets without unanimous inventor consent. Voting rights consolidated, control shifted. The signatures they'd celebrated were confetti now. Mom's face collapsed in slow motion. Brent tried to talk. Words fell out of him like spare change. I turned my camera on. "I never wanted this," I said. "True enough. But you taught me something, Dad. Ownership isn't what you say. It's what survives scrutiny." The board voted. It wasn't close. Brent was terminated for cause. The sale was unwound. The trust appointed a new CEO. Me. After, there was a private call, family only. Dad looked older. Mom looked smaller. "We did this for you," Mom said, reaching for a justification like a life raft. "No," I replied, "you did it to me. There's a difference." They asked for forgiveness. I offered terms. They kept their house, their dignity, mostly. They lost their seats, their access, the illusion that love grants entitlement. As for Brent, the market has a long memory. So do regulators. Weeks later, I stood alone in the lab. The hum was steady, familiar. I ran my hand along the casing of the prototype, the one they'd sold without understanding. It responded the way it always had. Loyalty isn't blind, it's earned. Betrayal isn't loud, it's precise. I don't hate them. Hate is sloppy. I prefer accuracy. When people ask how it felt, I tell them the truth. It felt like breathing again.